I never thought a mandatory safety drill would change my entire life. But there I was, sprawled on top of a complete stranger in a bright orange lifeboat, our faces inches apart, and something inside me just clicked into place. Let me back up and tell you how I ended up in this situation, because trust me, it's a story. So I'd been working as a junior accountant for this massive shipping company for about 2 years, stuck in a grey cubicle reviewing invoices and expense reports until my eyes crossed. My boss, Margaret, called me into her office one Tuesday morning with this weird smile on her face. Turns out the company needed someone to do a 3-month audit on one of their container ships, the Pacific Dawn, and apparently I was the lucky winner. I'd never been on anything bigger than a ferry, but Margaret assured me it would be an adventure. She had no idea how right she was. The first week on board was honestly pretty miserable. I got seasick immediately, couldn't sleep because of the constant engine noise, and felt completely out of place among the crew. They were all these weathered, competent people who knew exactly what they were doing. And there I was, this pale office worker, stumbling around trying not to throw up. I mostly kept to myself, ate meals alone in my tiny cabin, and tried to focus on the mountains of paperwork I needed to review. Then came the lifeboat drill. It was my second week on board, and the captain announced over the intercom that we'd be conducting a full safety exercise that afternoon. I'd been avoiding most of the crew social situations, but this was mandatory. Everyone had to participate. I showed up at the muster station in my ill-fitting life jacket, feeling awkward and trying to blend into the background. That's when I first really noticed him. Kelton. He was one of the deckhands, probably mid-20s like me, with these striking dark eyes and sun-bronzed skin that came from working outside every day. He had this confident, easy way of moving that I envied, like he belonged exactly where he was. I'd seen him around the ship before, of course, but always from a distance. Now he was standing about 10 feet away, helping some of the other crew members with their life jackets, laughing at something someone said. The drill began, and the bosun started explaining the procedures. We were actually going to lower one of the lifeboats and get inside it, practice the real thing. My stomach did a nervous flip that had nothing to do with seasickness. Heights weren't really my thing, and the idea of dangling over the ocean in a little boat made my palms sweat. When it was time to board, there was this organized chaos as people climbed in. The lifeboat was already suspended over the side of the ship, swaying slightly, and you had to step across this gap to get inside. I hesitated, frozen at the edge, very aware of the drop to the water below. Behind me, I could hear someone saying, "Come on, mate, just step across." But my feet wouldn't move. Then Kelton was there, suddenly beside me. "Hey, first time?" he asked, and his voice was gentler than I expected, with this slight accent I couldn't quite place. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "It's okay," he said. "I've got you. Just take my hand." I reached out, and his hand closed around mine, warm and calloused and strong. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, but the ship chose that exact moment to hit a wave, and the lifeboat lurched. I stumbled forward, Kelton tried to steady me, and somehow we both ended up tumbling into the lifeboat together. I landed hard on the bench seat, and Kelton landed directly on top of me. For a few seconds, everything went still. His face was right above mine, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, feel his breath on my cheek. His body was pressed against mine, solid and warm, and I became hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. His hand was still holding mine. Time seemed to stretch out, elastic and strange. "Sorry," he said, but he didn't move right away. He was looking at me with this expression I couldn't read, something curious and intense, and I felt heat flooding my face. My heart was hammering so hard, I was sure he could feel it. Someone laughed, breaking the moment. "Smooth boarding, Kelton," one of the other crew members called out. He rolled off me quickly, and I sat up, flustered and disoriented. But as the bosun continued with the drill instructions, I caught Kelton glancing at me, and when our eyes met, he smiled. Not a mocking smile, but something warmer, almost shy. The rest of the drill passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything except the lingering sensation of his weight on top of me, the memory of his face that close to mine. It had been maybe 5 seconds of contact, but it had shaken something loose inside me. I'd had crushes before, sure, but they'd always been vague, distant things. This felt different. This felt urgent and real and terrifying. After the drill ended and we were back on deck, I tried to slip away to my cabin, but Kelton caught up with me. "Hey, wait up," he called. I turned and he jogged over, that easy smile on his face. "You okay? That was quite an entrance we made." "Yeah, I'm fine," I managed. "Sorry about that. I'm not really the most coordinated person." "Neither am I, apparently," he said, and there was something in his tone, some underlying current I couldn't quite identify. "I'm Kelton, by the way. I've seen you around, but we haven't officially met." "Adrian," I said, and we shook hands. Even that brief touch sent electricity up my arm. What was wrong with me? "You're the accountant, right? Here for the audit?" I nodded. "Must be pretty different from your normal routine," he said. "How are you finding life at sea?" We talked for maybe 10 minutes, just casual conversation about the ship and my work and his job as a deckhand. But I was intensely aware of him the entire time. The way he gestured when he talked. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he stood with his weight shifted to one hip. When he finally excused himself to get back to work, I felt simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I found myself looking for him around the ship, taking routes that might lead me past where he worked. I felt like a teenager with a crush, which was ridiculous. I was 26 years old. I should have had more control over myself. But the thing was, I'd never really let myself think about this before. I dated a few women in college, relationships that always fizzled out after a few months. I'd told myself I just hadn't found the right person yet, that I was focused on my career, that I was a late bloomer. Now, lying in my narrow bunk at night, with the ship rocking beneath me, I had to face what I'd been avoiding. The way I felt about Kelton wasn't just admiration or wanting to be friends. It was attraction, pure and simple. And that meant I had to reconsider some things about myself. It was scary, honestly. Not because I had any moral problem with being gay, I didn't, but because it meant I'd been lying to myself for so long. It meant starting over in a lot of ways. It meant uncertainty. About a week after the lifeboat incident, I was working late in the small office they'd set up for me, a converted storage room near the bridge. It was past 11, and I was deep in a particularly confusing set of fuel expense records when there was a knock on the door. I looked up, surprised. Nobody usually came by this late. "Come in," I called, and the door opened to reveal Kelton, still in his work clothes, looking tired but somehow still annoyingly attractive. "Hey," he said. "Saw your light on. You're working pretty late." "Yeah, trying to make sense of these numbers," I said, gesturing at the papers spread across my desk. "What brings you by?" He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd take a walk, and I saw your light." He paused, then added, "Mind if I come in for a minute?" "Sure," I said, even though my heart had started that annoying racing thing again. He came in and looked around the cramped space, then sat down on the edge of the desk, close enough that I could smell the salt air and something else. Maybe soap or deodorant, clean and masculine. "This is a pretty depressing office," he observed, and I laughed. "Yeah, it's not exactly corner office material, but it works." We talked for a while, and it was easier than I expected. He told me about growing up in New Zealand, how he'd been working on ships since he was 19, how he loved the travel but sometimes missed having a real home. I told him about my boring accounting life, my tiny apartment back in Seattle that I barely spent any time in, how I'd always played it safe and never really taken any risks. Coming on this ship was a risk, he pointed out. That took guts. It was more like I got voluntold, I admitted. But yeah, I guess it was a change from my normal routine. You seemed different from when you first got here, he said, and there was something intent in the way he was looking at me. More relaxed. More like yourself, maybe. Maybe, I said. It's strange being out here. Everything feels different, like the normal rules don't apply. I know what you mean, he said quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, and the air between us felt charged with something I didn't want to name. Then he stood up. I should let you get back to work. Just wanted to say hi. Thanks for stopping by, I said, and meant it. After that, he started finding excuses to come by my office. Sometimes he'd bring coffee. Sometimes he'd just stick his head in to ask how the audit was going. We'd end up talking for 20 minutes, half an hour, about everything and nothing. I learned that he loved reading, that he'd studied marine biology for a year before dropping out, that he was terrible at cooking but great at fixing things. He learned that I played piano badly, that I was an only child, that I'd always wanted to travel but never had the courage. The more time I spent with him, the more certain I became about my feelings, and the more terrified I became that he'd figure it out and things would get awkward. I tried to keep my distance emotionally, tried not to read too much into the way he smiled at me, or how he always seemed to know when I needed company. But it was hard. Really hard. One night, about 6 weeks into my time on the ship, a storm rolled in. It wasn't anything dangerous, but the seas got rough, and I couldn't sleep. I was lying in my bunk, trying not to think about the way the ship was pitching, when there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Kelton standing there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, hair messy like he'd been trying to sleep too. You awake? He asked, which was pretty obvious since I was standing there. Want some company? These storms can be rough if you're not used to them. I let him in, and we sat on my bunk, backs against the wall, just talking quietly while the ship rolled beneath us. At some point, without really meaning to, I started telling him about my life back home, how empty it felt, how I'd been going through the motions for years without really living, how being on the ship had made me realize I'd been afraid of something, though I couldn't quite articulate what. Sometimes we're afraid of being who we really are, Kelton said softly. Afraid that if people really knew us, they wouldn't like what they saw. Yeah, I said. Yeah, exactly that. He turned to look at me, and in the dim light from the porthole, his face was serious. For what it's worth, Adrian, I like what I see. I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. My breath caught. The way he was looking at me, the weight of the moment, it felt like standing on the edge of something vast and unknown. Kelton, I started, not sure what I was going to say. I'm going to be honest with you, he said, and his voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Because I think maybe you need to hear it, and I need to say it. I like you. Not just as a friend. I've liked you since you first showed up at that lifeboat drill looking terrified. And if I'm completely wrong about this, if I'm reading things wrong, just tell me, and we can pretend I never said anything. But I don't think I'm wrong. Everything seemed to stop. The storm, the ship, time itself. He liked me. He actually liked me. All those moments I'd been analyzing and second-guessing, they'd been real. "You're not wrong," I heard myself say. "You're not wrong at all. I wasn't sure. I've never really, I've never been with a guy before. I've never even really admitted to myself that I could want that. And I'm probably not making any sense right now." He smiled, and it was the warmest, most genuine smile I'd ever seen. "You're making perfect sense." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't know what I'm doing." "That's okay," he said. "We can figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just, let's see where this goes." I nodded. And then somehow we were kissing, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His lips were soft, and he tasted like the peppermint tea he'd been drinking earlier, and my whole body felt like it was lighting up from the inside. When we broke apart, I was breathing hard, and he rested his forehead against mine. "Okay?" he asked. "More than okay," I said. That was wow. He laughed softly. "Yeah, wow." We spent the rest of the night talking and kissing and just being close to each other. Nothing rushed, nothing pressured, just exploring this new thing between us. By the time the storm had passed and dawnlight was creeping through the porthole, I felt like a different person, or maybe like myself for the first time. The rest of my time on the ship was both the longest and shortest 6 weeks of my life. Kelton and I were careful around the crew, not hiding exactly, but not advertising either. In private, though, we were inseparable. He'd sneak into my cabin after his shift, and we'd lie in that narrow bunk, talking until we fell asleep, tangled together. He taught me to tie sailing knots and showed me the parts of the ship I'd never seen. I helped him study for his officer's exam, and read to him from the books he'd borrowed from the ship's small library. I was falling in love with him. I knew it with absolute certainty. And the terrifying part was that I was pretty sure he was falling for me too. As my departure date approached, we had to talk about what would happen next. We were sitting on the deck late one night, the stars incredible above us, when I finally brought it up. "So I leave in a week," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know," he said quietly. "I've been trying not to think about it." "What do you want to happen? After I leave, I mean." He was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want?" "I want to try," I said. "I know it's complicated with you being at sea and me being in Seattle, but I want to try. You've changed my whole life, Kelton. I don't want to just walk away from that." "I want to try too," he said, and the relief in his voice matched what I was feeling. "I get shore leave in 3 months. I could come to Seattle, and there's video calls and messages. It won't be easy, but I think you're worth it." "Yeah," I said. "You're worth it too." The day I left the ship was one of the hardest days of my life. Standing on the dock, watching the Pacific dawn prepare to leave port, knowing Kelton was on board and I wouldn't see him for months, it physically hurt. But we'd made plans. We had a future to look forward to. That was 8 months ago now. Kelton did come to Seattle on his shore leave, and it was even better than I'd imagined. He met my parents, who were surprisingly cool about the whole thing once they got over their initial shock. "I'm looking for a new job, something that'll give me more flexibility to travel and meet up with him at different ports. We video call almost every day, and yeah, it's hard being apart, but it's also worth it. I never expected that stumbling into a lifeboat would lead me here, to this life where I'm finally being honest about who I am and what I want." Sometimes I think about that moment, sprawled on top of Kelton with his face inches from mine, and I wonder if he felt it too right then, that sense of something beginning. He says he did. He says he knew right then that I was going to be important to him, that we were going to be something. I don't know what the future holds exactly. Long distance is challenging, and there are a lot of logistics to figure out. But I know that I'm happier than I've ever been. I know that finding Kelton helped me find myself. And I know that sometimes the best things in life happen when you let yourself fall. Even if you're scared. Even if you don't know where you'll land. Because sometimes, if you're really lucky, you land exactly where you're supposed to be.